My first Christmas away at college was a sort of sordid, lonely affair. I didn't have the money to go home and spend Christmas with my family. My college did allow students to stay over in their dorm rooms during holiday break though. This meant that I stayed in my room for the entire 5 weeks between the 2 semesters. Obviously, not a whole lot of other students did this. This meant that the huge, normally packed campus was basically turned into a winter wasteland. You know, I actually had a lot of problems during this break. I've actually shared a few of them before, but I haven't shared this one yet. First off, I was drinking quite a lot during this time. I didn't really think too much about it though. I was in college and it wasn't like it was hurting anyone, so I just did it. My personal drink of choice was vanilla vodka. I can't count how many days and nights I walked down to the store in order to grab some. On Christmas Eve, I was feeling particularly lonely, and I really didn't have much to drink on me. Not only that, I realized the liquor store would be closed on Christmas Day. To be honest, I was surprised that with so few students on campus that the store was even open on Christmas Eve as well. I decided to walk down to the store. Now, if any of you have ever been on a large campus or in a big city when it didn't have many people around, it's a very strange and surreal experience. It kinda makes you a little bit more wary of whatever or whomever you do happen to see. When I walked into the store, I noticed that there was someone leaning against the outside. I was horrified, thinking it must be a homeless man, especially because of just how cold it was outside. I mean, just the wind chill had to be below 0. I went into the store and bought my stuff. Then, when I came out, I observed the guy a bit more closely. The side of the store was an alleyway that he happened to be sitting in. I could tell he was breathing, so he was still alive, thankfully. I really wished I could do something to help him. I felt bad for buying the vodka when I didn't really have money to give, and I could have given him some. I decided to walk home, but it wasn't long before I turned around and looked back at the store. I was feeling a bit bad. I noticed that the guy on the side of the door had gotten up though. Not only that, but he had begun walking in the direction that I was walking in. I started to get a little bit nervous, especially so when he crossed the street and was on the same side as me now. I began to wonder if he had done that on purpose, because now it was clear he was following me, and I couldn't really think of any good reason to do that. The walk back wasn't a short one either. As I kept on going, I looked back at the guy as he made it obvious he was following me. I didn't assume he was a student either, because he certainly did not look like one. He was battered in old and dirty clothes, which I had noticed when he was sitting against the store. He smelled quite bad too. Anyway, he took every single turn that I took, even ones that didn't lead me directly back to my campus dorm, so there was no doubt he was following me. Now, when we got closer to it, there was a small way I took to get there. I would cut behind this building, walking on earth rather than sidewalk. There were a lot of trees back there, so it was not the most ideal place to walk when someone was following you, but it would cut a few minutes off the travel time. When I got through there, I was in more of an open spot. There was also a light right above as I got back onto the sidewalk. I went to look back again, and at that point I saw the man once more. This time though, I saw him standing in the light for really the first time. He was walking a little bit arched over, theatrically swinging his arms back and forth. He seemed to be wearing a Santa hat, and I noticed it looked like he didn't have any hands. It looked like he had hooks instead. In a normal situation, I think that wouldn't bother me much. I mean, I even once worked with a disabled guy who had 2 hooks for hands because he thought it looked cool, but this situation was a bit different. This guy was obviously following me and was swinging those hooks back and forth in what looked like an aggressive manner. Not knowing what else to do, I took off running, and I ran as fast as I could. I didn't even worry I might slip on the ground because of the ice. I did almost fall forward a couple of times, but thankfully I managed to hold my footing. I sprinted all the way back to the dorm. Taking out my card to open the door, I fumbled with it and realized why people from horror movies might fumble with their cards so much. I did manage to get inside and quickly shut it behind me. Looking back, I noticed the man was still out there, but now he had stopped pursuing me. Instead, he was just kinda standing there, a bit far back from the entrance. He was just staring at me. I kept on watching him. Finally, he lifted one of his hooked hands, waved it at me like he was telling me goodbye, and then turned and slowly walked away. I never saw that hooked man again. I don't know if he was wanting to rob me or hurt me, or if he was even just screwing with me because he thought it was funny. I mean, the situation was really out there. I could absolutely believe it was a man who happened to have two hooked hands that really wanted to mess with me. I don't know, but it was terrifying when it happened. I went back to my dorm room and had a whole lot of vanilla vodka to celebrate that Christmas Eve. This happened on Christmas Eve, when I was about 13 years old. I'm not going to list any names of places because I live in a different country, and I prefer to be anonymous. I had an uncle that long before I was born was suspected of killing 4 people quite brutally in a small house in the town that my family lived in. Even though he was found not guilty, it was really the opinion of almost everyone that he in fact was. So he became a bit of a boogeyman in that area, especially with the kids. Now, I didn't grow up in that town though. This was my dad's side of the family, and he'd moved away to go to school and settled down in the town that he went to school in. We normally went to my mom's family for the holidays, although the occasional trip to my dad's family was not unheard of. This year, we decided to go to his. I did always enjoy going there, especially because it was such a rare thing. On Christmas Eve, though, my parents needed something from the local market and sent me to go grab it. It was extremely cold outside, but that didn't really bother me. What bothered me more was just how dark it was, mostly because I was walking around in an unknown town. It was weird and creepy. It was especially quiet outside, likely due to everyone being home with their family. Now, I was familiar with the house that the murders supposedly took place in. My uncle was someone I didn't know very well either. I'd only met him a few times and not very long for each. He wasn't at the celebration this year either. Some of the older kids were walking around outside and saw me as I stopped by the market. After I walked out and went on my way home, they all began to follow me. I wasn't really that worried because even though they were older than me, they were just kids, you know? I had no reason to believe they were up to anything bad. So it was that I was walking down the street, and actually after a while I heard the steps behind me begin to speed up. I turned around and saw the 4 kids were running at me pretty quickly. I didn't know what to do, so I kinda just got stuck there like an idiot. I had never been bullied before or anything like that, and I didn't know any of these guys either. I didn't think something like that could happen to me randomly. When the kids came closer, one of them pulled out a knife. They demanded I hand over any money I had on me to them. Nowadays, I would probably just hand it over right away, but around this time I was young and stubborn and very determined not to. Instead, I walked slowly up to the 4 boys with a grim grin upon my face as a wonderful idea occurred to me. I think the boys were very taken aback by me walking toward them as they just kind of stared at me. I stopped in front of them and asked, "You know who my uncle's name is, right?" "Yeah, of course, why?" one of the boys replied. "And you know what he did to that family in that house, huh?" They indeed did. "Well, that's my uncle, and if you know what he did to them, what do you think he'll do to you if you hurt me?" I had never seen anyone turn as pale as those 4 boys in that moment. They didn't even hesitate. They turned around and began screaming and sprinting off down the street. I assumed they believed me, because who would ever admit to being related to someone who had done something so awful? I used to be the manager of a small store that was actually in a pretty large shopping area. I don't want to go into that much detail about that particular store because although I don't work there anymore, they still exist. At the time though, I was very often the closing manager of this store. This year, I volunteered to work on Christmas Eve. We were busy as all hell, but I always liked those busy days because they kept me so busy. We didn't close early and were actually open until around 11 p.m. The moment we closed though, I let the other employees go home for the last hour of Christmas Eve. I had nowhere to go myself though, really, so I went and did some paperwork in the manager's office. After a while, I heard some sort of thumping seeming to be coming from in front of the store. Wondering what was going on, I got up and went to go take a look. I have to admit, I was feeling a bit shocked when I saw a man fully dressed up as Santa Claus standing at the front door of the store. It seemed he was the one thumping on the door. I slowly walked over, but no matter if he was dressed like Santa, I was not just going to open it up like that. I asked the man what he wanted. "Let Santa in," he said slowly. "Let Santa in, it's Christmas." "I'm not letting you in," I told him. He seemed like he was very drunk. I had never seen a drunk Santa before, so it was a really weird experience. "I want to come in. It looks so nice in there. I bet you're going to be nice too." He paused for a moment, and when I didn't respond, he began to beat harder on the door, demanding I let him in or else. Scared, I turned and ran to the office to call the police. I stayed in the office until they showed up. The man was no longer at the store at that point. The police didn't even go and look for him, which I guess I did understand. I mean, he didn't successfully manage to break in or do anything but put a small dent in the door. Fortunately, they walked me to my car still, and one of them even drove with me to my house. It was very nice because I was expecting to see that Santa pop up out of nowhere. I expected to see him in the back seat of my car or something, or maybe hiding back at my apartment. None of that happened though. I was able to have a pretty decent Christmas too, once I was able to shake off the nervousness of what had happened. I've been having a problem with one of my neighbors, and it's been very, very irritating. I live in a neighborhood where people don't take very good care of their pets. I mean, there are all sorts of cats just wandering around. I name them even because I see them all the time. Often, I'll even coax them to come over and let me pet them a bit. I'm a firm believer though that cats should be indoor pets, because then they'll lead longer and healthier lives. This is not about cats though, although the neighbors I am talking about do have some cats. The kind that like to sit right in the middle of the road and wait to annoy car drivers. That kind of thing. Those neighbors have a lot of animals. They even have a goat. But the most interesting are their dogs. They have a ton of dogs. A few of them are actually wonderful. They fill you with such joy if you see them. But they have these two dogs in particular that I absolutely hate, and I'll tell you the story of why now. One day, I just happened to be walking to the store. I had just walked down my driveway. I had been outside for less than a minute when this medium-sized black dog came sprinting out of their yard. I had never seen this animal before, and I never back away from dogs. The dog ran up to me, and as usual, I just kept on walking. Yet as I did so, it ran straight up to me and took a bite out of my leg. I was surprised as the dog ran off. I didn't retaliate in any way, but I did confront the owners about it. I didn't want to call animal control because I knew they would have put the dog down. I didn't want an innocent animal to be put down just because it had bad owners. However, as I'm sure you can guess, even telling them this, they did not do anything. They wouldn't even give me a paper to show the dog had a rabies shot. It was horrible. Worst of all, they began to not put the dog on a leash anymore. Because of this, I grabbed this iron rod that had been sitting on my porch, and I began to carry it in my messenger bag. just in case that dog came at me again. And guess what? It did. It happened quite often, actually. The dog would always run right at me, trying to corner me. For the first time ever, I actually backed off from the dog. I was worried I would get bitten again. I swung the rod at the dog a few times, and eventually it did go away. I don't want to hear anything from dog lovers who think I was doing a bad thing. This was a dog I had spared the life of several times. I've even had a friend who had his dog get put down simply because of it chasing someone, not even any bites. So every time this dog came at me, I did my best to defend myself without hurting it too much. I did mention before that these neighbors were odd. There always seemed to be a new animal or some other that was showing up. I did tell you about the goat, but there was a much worse animal that eventually arrived. They got another aggressive dog, a much larger black one. One day, as usual when I was walking, this time both of the dogs came at me. I got really scared as they barked and growled and chased and nipped at me. Like a moron, this time I had forgotten to bring the rod with me because I hadn't seen the other dog in a few weeks. These two dogs were very scary. Their barks were so angry. They chased me into someone's yard and even up against the fence. They really wanted to bite me. Then a car drove by and scared them away. I tried to find something else to protect myself with after that, and found something I could easily carry with me whenever I left the house. The last incident happened when I went to do my Christmas shopping one evening. Not too long ago, actually. It was very cold and a bit icy outside. That was when I liked to go out, though. I hadn't seen those dogs in a while at this point. Right when I reached the edge of the neighborhood, though, I could hear that distinct barking, and those two dogs came sprinting out of the dark at me. I got scared and tried to move away, but I slipped on the ice and fell. The smaller dog began to growl and advance on me. Just before it could bite into my neck, there was this incredibly loud electric sound. That dog that was about to bite me was laying on the ground whimpering. The bigger dog, terrified at that noise, turned around and ran off. Slowly, I got up to my feet, wary of that dog laying on the ground. I never wanted to hurt him, and I know his aggression was more the fault of his owner than him, but I had bought a stun gun to protect myself, and protect me it did. I didn't see the dogs in the following days, and I wonder if they'll leave me alone from now on. So 2 nights ago, my mom received a phone call from an unrestricted number talking about some seriously messed up stuff. She called me to come and get her, so I'll pretty much lay out everything that happened. At 3:38 in the morning, I got a text from my mom asking if I was still up. I replied yes, and was curious as to what she could possibly want. It was a work night for her, and she was always one to go to bed early. My father's a firefighter, and it was a night he was on shift, so I knew he was not home. Less than a minute later after I replied, she called me, so I answered it and could tell she was very upset immediately. Crying, actually. She was asking me to come pick her up from home, since I only lived 2 streets away from her. It would take me at most 2 minutes to drive to her house. Well, of course I immediately said yes. I threw in my Bluetooth speaker thing I had and started getting dressed. I grabbed one of my pistols and proceeded out my door. I grabbed it because I was still unsure what the situation was. As I was rushing to get ready, I repeatedly asked her what was wrong. She told me that at about 3:28, she'd gotten a phone call from a restricted number and answered the phone since it had woken her up. Upon answering, some guy just started talking, a voice she didn't recognize at all. She was unclear what he'd initially started saying when she picked up, since she was still out of it from just waking up. When finally alert, she said the man had told her he was babysitting a 9-year-old girl named Ashley earlier on, and when she was on the couch with him, he'd done stuff to her, basically admitting to molesting her. Obviously, my mom was completely blindsided by what she was hearing, and immediately started asking who she was speaking to. Was this some kind of sick prank call? She told the person to never call her again, and hung up immediately. Immediately after she hung up, the restricted number called back and tried to talk to her again. Again, she stated this had better not be some sick prank and hung up once more. After a third call of saying a bunch of creepy stuff again, my mom wasn't too sure what to do. She was very uncomfortable though. She headed to the kitchen to turn on all the house lights and grab one of her knives. Again, she hung up. After the fourth call though, she was fed up. She just told him straight from the start, "Listen up, I'm done playing your games. I'm gonna call the cops. Who the fuck is this?" The man became very angry. "No, you listen up. I'm not here to answer your questions. You're here to listen to me. Now, you're gonna stay on the line and listen to everything I did to this girl, because otherwise I'm going into her room and I'm gonna do it again." My mom hung up again. That's when she texted and called me and stayed on the line with me as I was quickly getting ready to head over there. While on the line, the man called a fifth time. My mom ignored this call though. It turned out he left a voicemail. While on the way there, he continued to call over and over. At this point, my mom was not answering anymore. That's when I pulled up to the side of her home. I'm not sure if this is some weird coincidence or not, but as I was about 2 or 3 houses down from hers, about to pull up, the person suddenly stopped calling. That being said, I was still around the corner, so I don't know if I would have been in sight yet when they stopped. She jumped into my car and we drove down to the police station. I'm also a firefighter for the city, so I knew a cop working and knew I'd rather bring all this up to him as opposed to just calling 911 raw. We get there and explained everything to him, and my mom told him about the voicemail as well. She didn't want to listen to it and asked the cop if he could instead, maybe get a sense of what my mom was talking about. The cop listens to it and said it was about 15 seconds long. Says, "Yeah, you don't want to listen to that." Anyway, I asked if it was possible to trace that restricted number, since I thought you could. He said he didn't think you could, though. He went back and grabbed his supervising officer to get his input on what should be done. Unfortunately, there was not really anything that could be done. He asked my mom if she recognized either the man's voice or knew a little girl named Ashley. My mom said no. Therefore, there wasn't really any way or any reason to get a detective involved. He also suggested there was a strong possibility this was just some guy fabricating this whole story, because that's how this weirdo got off. Just a crazy coincidence that out of any random number this dude could have called, it happened to be my mom's. The officer said best case scenario, my mom's cell phone provider could likely trace the call and see who the number belonged to. They assured us though that most likely the phone company would absolutely not give us this info unless we had orders from a judge. Basically, we just filed our report. I brought my mom home and waited until my dad got home from work in the morning. Has anyone ever heard of something like this before? Should I try to get a hold of the phone company and see what info I can get? I'm sure it would put my mom at ease if the number was from a few states over, as opposed to a local number. I don't know, it just seems weird to try and brush this whole thing off and hope they never call my mom again. The way I see it, if someone makes a bomb threat to a school, which is usually always just some kid or someone not serious at all, it's always treated as if it's true and becomes a huge ordeal. So why not treat a phone call of a little girl being molested in the same category? I don't know what I should do.